Welcome, welcome, everybody. Thanks for downloading another episode of Wigs for Wigs. I'm Joe Cook, joined once again by Bill Venezia, and we have another guest with us joining us here today on Zoom, and I'm going to turn it over to Bill to introduce our new guest today. Bill?
Our guest is Dr. Michael Buxbaum, renowned psychiatrist, and Michael comes with an interesting perspective from the East. Michael was born in Czechoslovakia, and in '68, when the Russian troops moved in from the East to make the Czechs toe the line, especially Dubček and Svoboda, Michael and his family escaped to Switzerland. So Michael went to Switzerland and then spent time being educated in England and then came to the good old United States. So a good portion, I believe, of what shapes us is where we came from. And Michael brings a great perspective, a good, interesting perspective. Joe, if you want to talk about our topic. And
Sure, just first of all, what part of Czechoslovakia do you come from? Because my grandfather comes from Czechoslovakia.
Oh, well, I guess here we are all 57 varieties, but I come from the Moravian part, which is actually the northern Moravia, which is close to the Polish border. So we were perhaps about 5 kilometers from the Polish border.
Yeah, my grandfather is from, I don't even know how to pronounce this. The Žilina region, Zilina, the Z with a...
Žilina, yes.
What modern Slovakia, that's where he's from.
Correct, that's correct, yeah. So now it's the Slovak, so yeah. Slovakia and...
Part of Slovakia now, yeah.
Where I am from, then now would be called the Czech Republic, right.
So welcome. Thanks for joining us today. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about a topic that Bill and I touched on just a little bit in our last episode, which is this idea of a multi-party, a more than a two-party system, how it works in practice, how it might maybe become brought about here in the United States, and how it might impact our president election this year in 2024, for example, Robert Kennedy. And we'll also look at some history of how independents, third-party candidates have impacted some presidential elections in the United States and maybe abroad also, as we go through and discuss this today. So, Bill, what order do you want to go in today here?
Oh, I'm just going to give a little history and then let Michael talk about his views with regard to the a multi-party system.
Sure.
It's not in the history of the United States. I mean, I'm going to go back just as far as, say, 1912, when Teddy Roosevelt ran and formed the Bull Moose Party, which was a reaction to his successor, Taft. He wasn't pleased the way Taft's administration had gone. He felt like Taft had veered away from what Teddy had started. In fact, Teddy was able to run for re-election in 1912, but he chose to basically endorse Taft, who he felt like betrayed the cause, the Roosevelt.
Yeah, and I have thoughts on that. I think Teddy really was more interested just in getting back in the game.
I think so. I think it would definitely was partially
one of his children once said that he always needed to be, what was it? The bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. That was his children's view of Teddy Roosevelt.
It's interesting to note that the Bull Moose Party received 16.5% of the vote. Wilson got 41, almost 42%, and Taft 23.3%. So if you add the two percentages together, it would have really made a difference. But it did impact the Republican Party, I'm sure. In '48, Strom Thurmond ran as a third-party candidate, right, the Dixiecrats.
Yeah.
He didn't fare as well. I mean, he had, don't forget, this is the election that Truman was left for dead. Truman didn't actually want to run for president in 1948 for re-election. But that 7.34% could possibly have impacted the election. Actually, I think it probably limited Truman, who got 49.4%, and Dewey got 45%. Now, if you remember, Strom Thurmond was Democrat, but the Democrats had split over the desegregation of the military that Truman had done.
Yeah, Strom Thurmond running that year as a Dixiecrat, a segregationist Democrat, really is a large part of what made people expect Harry Truman to lose to Thomas Dewey, was that there would be that divide in the Democratic Party. So it actually was the underperformance of Strom Thurmond against expectations that allowed Truman to ultimately prevail on election day.
But it was ultimately, those Dixiecrats were formally Democrats because the South was pretty solidly Democratic at the time. And then in '68, George Wallace, a segregationist, segregation now, segregation today, and segregation forever. Forever. I mean, he ran in a very hotly contested race between Humphrey and Nixon. He got 8.5%, and Humphrey got 42.7%, and Nixon 43.4%. It seemed that that's what might have been the impetus for Nixon's Southern strategy with regard to kind of lassoing those former Democrats into the Republican Party.
Right. The thing is with George Wallace, would those people have otherwise voted for a Northern liberal like Hubert Humphrey? Probably not. Would have probably veered towards Richard Nixon.
They did in 1960. I think it was more a reaction to all the civil rights legislation that was passed in 1964.
Well, you're talking about Hubert Humphrey was the author of the Civil Rights Act.
Yes, he was.
John F. Kennedy was not a out and out civil rights supporter when he ran in 1960.
No, he wasn't. But he basically took that mantle because of his non-rebuke and embrace of Martin Luther King when Martin Luther King was jailed. Nixon had the opportunity to do something as a sitting vice president, but he didn't. So for all intents and purposes, the South went Republican and wanted to basically continue as a segregationist community.
George Wallace was the last independent candidate to have actually won a state's electoral votes in a presidential election. Which of course, that's what it really comes down to in a US presidential election, is actually winning states, right? Because Ross Perot, I think you were probably just about to talk about Ross Perot, but in 1992, Ross Perot took, 19% of the national vote?
Yep, 19%, yep.
But, which outperformed the national vote count of George Wallace, but George Wallace won states, and really that's what it's all about, is winning states' electoral votes. So I think Ross Perot is actually a good jumping off point for us, because here's a guy who took, let's just round it up, a fifth of the vote in the United States, but didn't actually gain a single electoral vote in the 1992 election. So,
Joe, but I just want to interrupt you for a second. But what he did do, I mean, the numbers were 43% for Bill Clinton, 37% for Herbert Walker Bush. What he did do is take more votes away from Herbert Walker Bush. He mostly, with his business background, swayed more Republicans than Democrats, I believe.
I mean, let's talk about that giant sucking sound that was going to come from Mexico.
Yeah, even though basically he didn't win any states, it did impact the election for taking votes away from Bush.
Impact the election. The thing is, I think what we really want to talk about is it viable ultimately for somebody who's not a Republican or a Democrat to actually break the system so much that it leads to a change to the two-party system. And Ross Perot took a fifth of votes in the country, changed the outcome of the election. It got Bill Clinton elected in all likelihood, but didn't significantly alter the stranglehold that the two-party system has on the United States. So maybe I'll turn it over either to you, Bill, or to Dr. Buxbaum, but what would it actually take, does anybody think, for something to break that stranglehold that the two-party system has on America?
I'll defer to Michael, because Michael has an interesting take on this.
Well, I don't know how interesting it is, but first of all, I want to thank you very much for inviting me. I've been a fan of this show, and I've been watching it and commenting pretty much every episode, other than sports, because I know very little about sports.
We get very mixed feedback from people who respond to our sports stuff versus people who respond to our politics.
So, for me, the journey has been much shorter than for you guys because I came here in 1980. But it seems to me, and maybe it's because I'm getting older, but it seems to me that in the beginning, I'm only talking since Reagan, since I've been here, it seems that the parties were willing to make compromises and talk to each other. I remember Reagan and Tip O'Neill were friends, even though there was a lot of daylight between them, but they had a drink every week and they were Irish guys.
Yeah,
so,
they had that Irish
but I don't see
connection.
that happen. Yeah, I don't see that happening
There
now.
was what was called the Long Democratic Congress, which is the Democrats controlled Congress basically from the 1930s until the Newt Gingrich Revolution in 1994. So any Republican presidents during that period, Dwight Eisenhower, Ronald Reagan, had to work with the Democratic Congress because that's just what the reality was throughout that period.
Correct. But, it seems that there was more like the centrists were making compromises more. But now, for example, people like myself, and there are, millions of us, feel completely left out by both of these parties because, the Republicans are very much controlled by the MAGA faction, by the extreme right. And then you have the Democrats, which have the extreme left, like the Bernie Sanders, the Squad, and so on and so forth. So, there is very little middle. So, I am one of these people who is fiscally conservative but socially liberal.
Yeah, I think I would put myself in that same camp.
And furthermore, right now we have two presidential candidates who, unless one of them dies, are be representing in the election, who are deeply unpopular. So it's not just me, because I'm one out of the 340 million people in this country, but deeply unpopular yet, and that's what I don't really fully understand. Yet there were other options on both sides. I mean, they had other options on both sides, and yet they chose one guy who, in my opinion, is a malignant narcissist, and another guy whose policies I don't agree with. So, and then the question is, whom should you vote for? Should you have it? It seems to me that a lot of people will be voting against somebody rather than for somebody, right? So you will say, who smells the least? Or are you going to vote for Hitler or for Stalin? Those type of decisions one has to be making. So, so I think there is a space for a third party, but what has been disappointing, well, I would say four parties. You could have the extreme right, center left, and then extreme left, and then those two extremes would be marginalized.
And that is not uncommon in other countries to have parties broken up that way, right? I mean, America having a strictly two-party system that nobody else can really break through is really more on the rare side if you look at world democracies, where most of the world's democracies seem to have a more multi-party parliamentary kind of system.
Right. That's correct. And whether it works better or, we could have a whole series of discussion whether these other countries, they have their own problems as well, and they have to make coalitions and this and that. But what I was sort of somewhat surprised by, and maybe you guys have some comments or interesting comments on that, is that Joe Lieberman, was trying to put forward the no labels, right? The no labels candidate. And I was kind of excited about that because I thought maybe that would be a centrist type of a person. And they had people whom I liked, like Joe Manchin or Larry Hogan, but none of them took it. Now, of course, Joe Lieberman died, but nevertheless, even though you could argue there are millions and millions of people who are not happy with the choices we have now, interestingly enough, nobody took up the mantle. So,
Joe, do you want to comment? I want to, because I know you have you've talked about this before, and I think I think we should get that out on the table about what your feelings are with regard to the future of the American political system, so to speak.
I Yeah, I mean, I have expressed this before, I think, but as a, again, as kind of like you described, a fiscally conservative, but socially more on the liberal side, but also very focused on national security issues as my top issue that I vote on, an old John McCain Republican. I mean, I feel like you, I don't really have a home in either of the major parties right now. I certainly don't feel at home in the MAGA Republican Party, but I'm certainly not a liberal Democrat, and the Democrats are growing increasingly towards the left end of the political spectrum, as you said. And I really do wish that even in 2020, I kind of hoped, or even in 2016, if you go back to 2016, there was polling to say that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were the least popular, least liked people ever nominated for president in the modern political era, since basically polling began on that sort of thing by the major parties. That even at that time, it seemed like there was an opportunity for somebody to run on kind of that centrist, I'm gonna govern effectively lane in politics. Maybe a John Kasich at that time, somebody from kind of that portion of the Republican Party, to stand up to Donald Trump. And it just didn't materialize. And like you said, more recently, the no labels, Joe Manchin kind of people thought he was going to run, especially when he announced he was going to retire from the Senate. Well, why is he retiring this from the Senate? People thought he was going to run for president, and then he chose not to. And I feel like the reason that they're not doing it is that they feel like it's going to lead to what Bill said in the history look that he did earlier on, which is that it's just going to lead to a split in one party, and it's going to lead to the other party just winning and then evaporate away, like other kind of split off parties have been in the past, and not lead to that kind of lasting change of, okay, here's a new centrist party that is going to oppose the wings, the fringes that have taken over the major parties. And somebody at some point has got to be a profile in courage and try to do it. And Bill, you kind of know, and I suppose you do too, because you've listened to our podcast, Dr. Buxbaum, but I'm increasingly cynical about just the motives of people involved in politics, the integrity, the moral courage, to use an old term, of people involved in politics, that they're not willing to do that because they don't want to risk their future fundraising, whatever it might be. But I wish somebody would step up and at least give it a try to really make a centrist run for president against these parties. Robert Kennedy Jr., I mean, to bring it into the current day, is not that alternative. He's running on kind of the people who believe in the conspiracy theories of Donald Trump, but don't like Donald Trump personally. So vote for me. That's not the alternative that I'm looking for. And I think people, as they look at him more, will realize that. But we need somebody to run in that center lane, and we're just not getting it. The primary system is not giving us that, because the primaries are controlled by the fringes of both parties that are giving us more and more extreme candidates on both sides. So
Yeah,
I don't know who it's going to be, but it has to happen, because you're right. Millions of us do feel that it's a choice between, whatever, whatever alternative or awful choices you want to use, Hitler and Stalin. But we don't have any other choice, right? What else? What other choice do we have? I wrote in John McCain in 2016, and I wrote in Colin Powell in 2020. I didn't vote for either one.
I have to say that when I look at the landscape of that, and I'm not saying that that's not such a bad idea, but I look at countries who have political systems with, multi-party systems. What I see on their horizons are secession of elections, instability. It's you talk about people with immorality. You see more alliances that are made out of convenience. I look at, just England for an example. Look at Brexit. I think Brexit's an outgrowth of their political system, to be truthful with you. which I kind of thought that England shot itself in the foot. I look at a country like Italy with multi-parties, and they haven't had a stable government in a long time. And they have a succession of calling for elections. Look at Israel. Look at Israel and what Israel has become currently in the world, a pariah, to be honest. Would you
say we have a stable government here right now?
I would say we're more stable than any other country. I don't know enough about Asia. I don't know enough, but I agree with you, Joe, that the system has to get broken in some way to shift it. And one thing I share with Michael, I consider myself a centrist, number one. And I basically didn't vote for him, but I should have. When I look at it, there was never more of a centrist than Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton basically stayed in that center lane and was extremely successful. Yeah. And his administrations produced surpluses. I'm not gonna basically suggest he was the total reason why the budget was balanced and because we had such a great .com economy. He benefited from that. But the man was a centrist, plain and simple. He was right down in the center, which appealed to most Americans. So if we're waiting for that person to come and take up that flag of centrism, I agree with what you said last week, Joe, that the Republican Party has to be destroyed. And the only way the Republican Party is destroyed is that basically Donald Trump is defeated. If he's defeated, the party will basically have to reinvent itself. And I do believe that the Democratic Party will then be forced to redefine itself. And I think that you're going to see something similar to a four-party system where there has to be compromise, number one. And if anything, I think the Democrats, their ability to compromise is pretty evident when the Speaker of the House is a Republican, but he's not the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the Democratic head. He's been calling the shots. And if not for him, we would have had a third Speaker of the House during this current administration. So I'm going to cede to Michael, but I see no way for a break in this logjam until we get rid of the cult of personality, which is Donald Trump.
Yeah, but my retort would be that not every country with multi-party system is dysfunctional. I mean, there are other like France, Netherlands, Germany. They all have multi-party systems, are relatively stable, and Britain actually has a two-party system. The third party, which is Social Democrats, are extremely small in number. So it's the Conservative and the Labour in England. But one thing I was going to ask your opinion about, and because so far nobody has been able to explain it, because when we had the primaries, there were other options so one has to also think about why people did not take the other options, because on the Democratic side, you had this guy, Dean Phillips, who was a young guy who seemed to be, again, I read some of his positions and they were essentially centrist, and he was a young, good-looking guy, not that looks should matter, but nevertheless they help. And then, and then you had, Gavin Newsom from California, who was sort of exploring it as well, but then for whatever reason decided he did not want to run. And then, of course, on the Republican side, you had 7 people on the stage. Some of them were totally under Trump, others were kind of Trump without the personality issues and the lawsuits, but yet people chose to vote for Biden and Trump. So why is that? And I don't really fully understand that. They are unhappy with them, but yet they voted for them.
I think there's a theme in American politics, and I think it comes from advertising world and Madison Avenue, that the person who is liked the most, who has a high Q factor. Do you ever hear Q factor? Q factor is why people, the quotient that's Madison Evans come up with, likability. And when it comes down to it, I honestly believe that influences it. And I do think that, sadly, it becomes almost a personality contest with regard to who the American people like the most or dislike the least. And I get this stuff from a pretty interesting guy in advertising, Danny Deutsch. And I am not adept at sensing trends as much as they are, but when you think about it, it's a handicap type of a business where you're basically handicapping an election the way you would a sporting event or the way you would track a business and a business success model, you know, and a lot of that is based on CEOs and stuff of that nature. So I'm not sure what type of chaos would be wreaked when we came up with say a 4-party system or even a 3-party system. But I do believe that one of the benefits of it, if we ever get there, is the fact that we would have to compromise more, because truthfully, it's the only way, you know, a democracy can survive, is to be able to sit down and hash it out and, okay, see where you come together on that Venn diagram and basically go from there. But again, those extremes keep pulling you away from that. You know what I mean?
Well, I also just want to point out, I mean, about why are they voting for these people in the primaries? Just a statistic here, that since 2000, this is where we have data on this, the average turnout for the general election for president is 60.5% of registered voters turn out to vote. But in primary elections, only 27% of registered voters turn out to vote to choose their party's candidates. So by and large, people are just not even participating in that process. So they may be very unpopular with the general population, but the vast majority of the population, 73% of the population, is not even participating in the vote to choose who the candidates are going to be. So what you're getting is the people who are diehard supporters of, I'll just use Donald Trump, are the ones who are actually turning out to vote in the primary, whereas in the broad swath of the population, people might not actually like Donald Trump and just kind of accept it that that's who's been nominated.
So if we look at that point of view, then in a way the blame lies with the people that they are not involved enough in the election.
Well, it does.
So
An old saying in American politics says decisions are made by those who show up. And by and large, the American people in the primaries to choose the candidates just simply do not show up to the polls.
Michael, grown up in Jersey City, as you know, which is the hotbed of the Democratic Party and maybe the epicenter of political corruption in the United States. You know, I basically would rail for, you know, like John the Baptist, you know, a voice crying in the wilderness for good candidates. And no doubt every time my hopes and dreams would get crashed by the machine basically running everybody over. And I came up with this opinion that I basically said, and this is before I left Jersey City living there, that, you know what, maybe people deserve the government that they get. You know, I hate to say that in Jersey City anyway, I kind of felt like that was always going to be what was going to happen after Election Day. You got people were satisfied in Jersey City with getting a job, going to a political war demand to get a job, getting a turkey at Thanksgiving. Those types of things, those types of little political things basically influenced their vote. So their vote was for sale, you know, to a certain degree. And they delivered, the Democratic machine in Jersey City, Hudson County in general, delivered these pluralities that were immense. In fact, when I think it was Robert Minor was elected governor of New Jersey, the then state Democratic chairman was Frank Hay, who was the mayor of Jersey City. Jersey City produced a plurality that was consistent with more people voting than actually lived in Jersey City. You know, but you know, why I even am interested in politics. And I'm just going to bring up one other third party candidate. You know, most mayoral elections in Jersey City, that local level, there was no such thing as there was a titular head of a Republican Party, which was practically non-existent. So it was a Democratic election. So in effect, it was nonpartisan to a certain degree. In 1969, after the riots had taken place in Newark, and there really was some skirmishes, but no real riots in Jersey City. There was a mayoral race. So the gentleman who was running was Tom Whalen. Tom Whalen, former city council president, he was the incumbent. Now, to ward off any competition, John V. Kenney, who was the Democratic chairman of Jersey City, he basically put up another candidate to ensure that white people would vote for Tom Whalen, this Irish Catholic guy. So he put up a gentleman by the name of Julian Robinson. Julian Robinson was a Black man, very intelligent, an educator from the Greenville section of Jersey City. But he was Black. Coming off the riots, you know that there was, in the cities after the riots, there was a lot of white flight. It scared the bejesus out of white ethnic voters in Jersey City, and Whalen got this huge plurality. And by the way, who funded Julian Robinson? The Democratic Party. John V. Kenney, the county chairman, funded his campaign. And basically his payoff was he got an administrative job at Jersey City State College. And that's where he went on to eventually become president of Jersey City State College. And very happy for his introduction into politics in 1969. So I kind of feel like, you can gerrymander the two-party system with a third party enough to tip an election. And I'm cynical enough to believe that can happen, because I wonder about the monies that were raised by Joseph Kennedy to get into the race. So anyway, that's my story about Jersey.
Maybe, I like that statement because I, had it before that, in a way you could argue you get the government that you deserve. So if truly only 27% of people do vote in the primary, then, nobody's telling people not to vote, right? So, that's up to them. The other thing which I see in this country, in Europe, generally, there is much higher number of people who vote. That's interesting as well. But also, I just find here people just vote not based on research, not researching into what people stand for, but more like, well, I come from a Democratic family, so I vote for Democrat, that sort of thing, that's kind of like a family tradition. Or
there's a lot of people who just vote down the line when you go to the ballot and just, I don't really know who the person is, but I'll vote for him.
Hey, Bergen County, Hudson County, vote row A, vote row B. That's why row A was so prized to get that ballot spot.
So there are like what's called one-issue voters, who just look at one issue and they vote for that. So if somebody's pro-choice, they vote pro-choice, no matter what else. The guy could be absolutely corrupt, but as long as he's pro-choice, they will vote for him. I'm of course exaggerating. So, part of it is also, putting the onus on the people themselves. The other question I had for you guys, how much the parties are responsible for, because it also seems to me that the party chooses their person and they promote that person. And since a lot of people just vote the straight party line, then it's kind of pretty much set by the party itself.
Well, you answered your own question with regard to the primaries. The primaries are orchestrated, manipulated by the parties and to their favorite candidate. I think, when was the last time we had a primary system that was close with regard to who we're going to pick as president? I can't remember one. I can remember, if you remember in a former time, and I'm not saying we should revert back to that because that was not without shenanigans. The party leaders brokered presidential elections at the convention. And, I'm not sure, we're not definitely going back to that. And if you're ever interested in seeing a good movie about that, The Right Man is the name of the movie. And it's about basically electing a president from back rooms of the convention. It's a really good movie too.
Well,
good.
Abraham Lincoln's close friend and bodyguard Ward Hill Layman printed off fake tickets for the Republican convention in 1860 for Lincoln supporters so that he would get louder ovations from his speeches than William Stewart would, and would therefore lead him to get the nomination. So those backroom shenanigans could give us good presidents from time to time.
That's true. All right. Actually, I got to say that 1960 was a pretty open race with regard to who was going to get the nomination.
On the Democratic side.
On the Democratic side. All right. Taking away the incumbency, which is another story. But you had Kennedy, who started very early and turned down an opportunity to be Adlai Stevenson's running mate in 56 because he felt like Adlai Stevenson was going up in smoke, and which he did, for the second time. And you had Estes Kefauver, who actually was his
running mate. Yeah.
Had been his running mate. He was interested. Hubert Humphrey. Lyndon Johnson thought that he had a straight line to the presidency because he was the Senate Majority Leader, and you got nothing done unless it went through Lyndon Johnson in the 1950 Senate. And you could ask Eisenhower about that and Nixon. And I'm trying to think, oh yeah, Adlai, he was interested. In fact, one of the starlets of the Democratic Party still as late as 1960 was Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a big Adlai Stevenson supporter who hated John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy ran a great campaign. He traveled the length and breadth of this country in a car with Teddy Sorensen, by the way, to basically campaign in every little spot. And one of the dirty tricks he employed, it wasn't a dirty trick. He campaigned against Humphrey, who we viewed as going to be a strong candidate. That Hubert Humphrey never served in World War II. Hubert Humphrey basically was almost like he was a conscientious objector. And Kennedy served in the war, as did Lyndon Johnson and the other candidates. And he took him down. He took him down when it became a two-man race late in the campaign. He took him down with ads saying that, he was akin to not a draft dodger. That term wasn't invented as of yet, but he didn't serve. And that was important, at that time with the American people. Lyndon Johnson took a poor strategy. He thought that I'm going to basically sit in what akin to the Rose Garden and do my legislation. And he didn't get on the road and campaign. And Kennedy outworked them all. Plus, there were other forces that led him to win the general election. But that's, he rose to the top of a 5-person race and was eventually crowned during the convention.
I would just say that probably the last one on the Democratic side was not that far back. It was I think it was 2008. Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama was a seriously competitive race between the two of them for who would be the Democratic nominee. That was not a sure thing going in. On the Republican side, I think the last really competitive one that kind of took a while to figure out was probably 1980. Reagan and Bush going against each other for the Republican nomination.
Yeah.
I mean, you could have had maybe a more competitive one, say in 1996, if General Powell had chosen to run, but he didn't. So Bob Dole didn't face any serious competition there. And just coming back to, you said Lyndon Johnson thought he had a smooth path because, he was the lawmaker, the guy who got everything done. You would think that Speaker of the House historically would be a great role to set you up to be president. And yet there's only one Speaker of the House who's gone on to be president. For my presidential trivia for you, Bill, who was it?
Speaker of the House to be president. I'm going to tell you the truth, Joe. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't blame you. It's James Polk.
Okay.
James Polk was the only Speaker of the House to go on to be president of the United States. So
not a bad president. I mean, but
and anybody who thinks vice president is the stepping stone to presidency. George H.W. Bush was elected to the presidency straight from the vice presidency. Who was the last one before that?
Taft.
No. Taft was Secretary of War for Roosevelt, not vice president.
Huh.
It was
Who?
Martin Van Buren, who
Oh,
was
boy.
Andrew Jackson's vice president, had been the last one. So
And you talk about a split ticket. Martin Van Buren from New York and Andrew Jackson. I mean,
So all these people jockeying to be Donald Trump's vice presidential candidate because they think it's going to set them up in the future to run for president. Well, good luck, because it's happened twice in 200 years that somebody's gone from vice president to being elected.
Well, the only thing now is that they are both old, so there is a good chance they will.
That's true.
I mean,
But
national
we very
selection
well,
by way possibly of McDonald's.
we very well may get our first female president that way.
Yeah,
Just being realistic, assuming Joe Biden keeps Kamala Harris, and
I was really just
Donald Trump might pick a woman also. Probably not dog murderer Kristi Noem anymore, but
She's dead, Joe. Come on. America likes
that is her dog.
more than they like presidents, I think.
that was a mistake. What happened to Mitt Romney? And he didn't kill his dog. He just put him on the roof of his car. but I was looking at the average age of an American male, and I was surprised. It's only 73. The average age at death is 73. So
Yeah, well, life expectancy has come down since COVID. I mean,
yeah, exactly. It used to be like 78.
Yeah. And they're both beyond even 78. So even if it was still they're both beyond it.
So I think Trump, isn't he 77? Trump?
Yep. He looks real good in those court pictures. I'm saying, before we run out of time, Joe, because I know we're pushing it to 10, why don't we talk about the implication of a third party, which I guess to all practical purposes is Robert Kennedy, is Green Party. I'm not sure what other parties are running. I mean,
there's always, the Libertarian Party gets on the ballot in certain states, and there's always a scattered few others, but those are the big ones, I guess. We just covered in class just this morning, we covered the 2000 election, all those confused elderly Jews who really wanted Pat Buchanan to be president, clearly, in Florida.
Yes.
Well, Joe, along those lines, because we didn't get to 2000, just to, before you go on, I don't want to interrupt you, but in Florida, that basically established the election of George W. Bush. Bush had 271 electoral votes, and Gore ended up with 270. And the vote differential in Florida was 537 votes as affirmed by the Supreme Court. But Ralph Nader got 97,421 votes.
Yep.
And Pat Buchanan got 17,484 votes. I mean, so when you think about it, coming down to the wire in Florida to decide the 2000 election, those two gentlemen basically impacted it in a big way. And I'm sad to say, in 2000, I voted for Ralph Nader.
Well, it didn't swing New Jersey to George W. Bush. So
no, it didn't. It didn't. So I guess I didn't help elect George W. Bush. But
I think for people like me, and it sounds like Joe as well, is that the dilemma is, should you just hold your nose and vote for the less evil person versus just putting in somebody who you like I'm planning to vote for Larry Hogan because I like him.
I like Larry Hogan.
But I know that it's just going to take away a vote for probably, because I could never vote for Trump, and I would have to get really drunk to vote for Joe Biden.
Right.
So,
Michael, what are you doing on election day? Maybe I'll get you drunk.
I've said that before, that essentially I'm a Republican voter, although I'm no longer a member of the Republican Party, who would not be voting for Donald Trump. So, okay, if we think of it that way, I am subtracting a vote from Donald Trump, but I have a very hard time pulling that lever for the other side. So subtracting, but not also adding to the other side. And if you look at a few states, I mean, you said 2000, how close it was. I'll use the Libertarian in 2020, Gary Johnson, in both 2016 and 2020, received a few thousand votes in some of these key states. that would be over the margin of what Donald Trump or Michigan, for example. Donald Trump lost Michigan to Joe Biden by fewer votes than what the Libertarian Party received in Michigan. You know, Libertarians are more Republican leaning than Democratic leaning, certainly. So if he could actually convince them to vote for him, just that alone would be enough for overtaking the margin that he lost to Joe Biden by in Michigan, just to use as an example. You know, his reception at the Libertarian Convention the other day doesn't show much promise for that happening, but, you know, we're not bringing up the Libertarians. We're talking about Robert Kennedy primarily, but even a few thousand votes that a party like that receives is enough to possibly be the difference in Arizona, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, right?
Well, in 2016,
those are the states that decide the election.
Those 5 states basically produced 77,000 more votes for Donald Trump, which ensured the election. You know, and when we talk about that election, who was a more lightning rod figure than Hillary Clinton? I mean, you look at her Q rating, the American public didn't like Hillary Clinton. They rejected her in 2008 and basically went with Obama. This goes back to her perceived meddling with the Clinton Initiative for Healthcare. You know, you know, truthfully, I don't think there's been a more vilified woman in American politics than Hillary Clinton. I am going to say one thing about her. I mean, the only Clinton I ever voted for was Hillary. But the truth of the matter is that she was a good Secretary of State, I thought. You know, I thought she did a good job. She was very competent, but not a likable person. It comes back to what Danny Deutsch is. Her Q factor was pretty low, you know, and so low that a reality television star would beat her in that election.
Well, not only that, back in 2008, like I said, in that primary, it was other Democratic senators who approached Barack Obama telling him he should run now because they didn't think Hillary Clinton was electable.
I'll throw another one at you.
The main ones of those was her fellow New York Senator, Chuck Schumer, was one of the main people recruiting Barack Obama to run because he thought Hillary would wait on the Democrats.
Yeah. You know, I don't think that Hillary she had a snowball's chance in hell, to be truthful with you. You know, it's kind of sad but that's the way people vote, to be truthful with you. They don't delve into the issues enough. Or the fact that I've talked to very intelligent people and I asked them, you know, do you see the possibility of a Trump election and the demise of American democracy? And no, that'll never happen here. But really, that'll never happen here. I would take the man at his word, you know, and truthfully, I guess for, you know, if he's elected president, I take him at his word that he'll be a dictator from day one.
The question with that is, though, he doesn't have the power to do that. He would have to organize a coup. And I think he's not capable of that. You know, you have to be like an evil genius. Now, he may be evil, but he's not a genius.
I would hope that would be true.
Because you would have to get I mean, the only way you could do it would be you have to put army on your side, and army would occupy Washington, kill a few opponents, you know, impose martial law, etc., etc. So that's the only way you could make a coup. The president, if he goes by the Constitution, doesn't have enough power to become a dictator.
Michael, I think that you saw under his administration the constant erosion of American institutions and norms. And I think for whatever reason, cult of personality, or the fact that elected Republicans didn't want to get primaried, they fell into line with this maniac. I mean, I cannot basically, it's unfathomable to me why. And that's what I totally believe, that most of them will basically fall into line because of their fear of their own losing power in their little sphere of influence.
But again, I think he just doesn't have enough. That's the only way you organize a coup. You would have to get the army behind you. And I don't think he has that ability. He cannot focus. He just says things out of his head. You know, you have to be calculating. And he doesn't have that ability. And I don't think the Americans would do that. You know, I mean, that's not just part of our nature. to be dictatorship. It would be a civil war if he really was able to do, if he was able to kind of suspend the constitution, which legally he cannot, but it would be civil war because there are so many people who hate him, people would rise up against him.
Michael, he stacked the Supreme Court.
Mhm.
He can basically, just for the sake of argument, he gets elected president of the United States. There are reforms that he wants. Some will be done by executive action, all right? Some will basically be done because his preferred Speaker of the House, if he does have the House when he gets elected, Mike Johnson will do whatever he wants. He aided and abetted him in trying to overturn the election by not certifying the electoral vote in 2020. I mean, and those laws that could potentially get passed, they'll pass muster with the Supreme Court. He's already eroded American democracy.
Obviously, he wanted to, not certify. He wanted to continue as a president and not recognize the fact that he lost. So he had all these lawsuits, and the Supreme Court, as stacked as it was, or as conservative as it is, went against him. So I think a lot of these justices who are conservative don't necessarily just say whatever the Trump says is right. They are scholars, they are intelligent people, and they go by the Constitution. So it's a mistake to say that just because you may be you may have conservative values, you are going to suspend democracy.
Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
I hope to God that that's not an eventuality. I hope that I hope that doesn't happen, but we'll see.
I mean, I think he will try to do it. Don't take me wrong, but I don't think that he has the capacity to do it, or that the army, that the armed services will follow him because they hate him, basically. They're not going to do it because Adolf Hitler wanted Germany, the German soldiers to swear loyalty to him, not to Germany. A lot of them refused. So here, the army is supposed to follow the Constitution, and they are not going to follow Donald Trump. They are supposed to follow the Constitution.
Well, Michael, that's theory and practice sometimes take different roads, but I hope that you're right. And you know what? I think you have an immigrant's belief in America, which I find endearing, because your travel to America is a lot different from the native-born Americans who sometimes take those things for granted.
Yeah, I don't take it for granted, but I would go to arms myself if somebody tried to subvert democracy. But I think but hopefully we won't have to find out. But we will see what.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, what's our time?
We have about 2 minutes. So actually, I'm going to just go to each of you for final thoughts, and I'll start with you, Bill.
Well, I have to say I found this very engaging. I think that a lot of what Michael talked about could potentially come to pass if the election breaks right in 2024. And I'll just leave it at that. And Michael, thanks so much for coming on with us. We greatly appreciate it. We're definitely going to have you back.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. And one thing what will come out of this discussion, and I'm absolutely sure of that, is that when the cabinet and the powers in America will hear us, they will definitely change their mind about the way they are doing things.
Yeah. I want to close. First of all, thank you for joining us, Bill, as always, and Michael also today. It's been really a pleasure to have you. And I want to finish by just reading a little thing, a quote from Montesquieu, the French philosopher of the Enlightenment. This is in his book, The Spirit of the Laws. And he says, in a large republic, there are men of large fortunes, and consequently of less moderation. There are trusts too great to be placed in any single subject. He has interest of his own. He soon begins to think that he may be happy, great, and glorious by oppressing his fellow citizens, and that he may raise himself to grandeur on the ruins of his country and his people. This is Montesquieu warning against the growth of a large faction, specifically a cult of personality type thing around one person, and how that could corrupt a republic just as well as it could any other form of government. And I'm very concerned, as you all know, that that's where we're headed if Donald Trump is reelected, is brought back into office in 2024. Again, I have a hard time holding my nose and pulling that lever for Joe Biden, but if we do see the return of Donald Trump, I don't see how that's not the end of the democracy that we hold, all of us, so dear in this country. And yet I really do believe that even if the democracy does survive and Joe Biden is reelected, it is critical that we break this stranglehold that the two-party system has on America, because the combination of factors of things like the small percentage of people who turn out to vote in primaries and other factors are giving us these awful choices for president, and we really deserve more. You said we get the government that we deserve. We deserve more in this country. Millions of us deserve better. And I really hope that somehow, someday, we start to get that soon in this country again. So that was the bell. That was, the debates are going to allegedly cut off people's mics when their time runs out. That was the end of our time. So
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of Wigs for Wigs. Please, all of you out there, if you have any thoughts or questions, reach out to us. We can be reached at Wigs for Wigs, that is WIGSFORWHIGS @gmail.com. We always love hearing from you. You could be a future guest on an episode if you reach out to us. So take care, everybody, and see you again soon for another episode of Wigs for Wigs.